So, all right, we are approaching our top 10. We are at number 10. What do you got for number 10?
Okay, so 10 for me is Dehumanizer. That album blew me away. I didn't even know that it was coming out. I hadn't heard anything about it. I went to the record store because I was getting ready to take a trip to the shore and I wanted some music to listen to in the car. I walked in the record store, I saw it on the wall, and I flipped out. I was like, oh my God, perfect timing. Um, I'm really in the mood for something like that. And I was very excited that it was a Dio Black Sabbath album. In those days, I mean, there's no information highway, there was no internet. So, I mean, and I stopped buying rock magazines for a little while. It just kind of got polluted with a lot of grunge and things that I wasn't really that interested in. So, I mean, there wasn't really a lot of heavy metal publications anymore that were strictly going to give me the information that I wanted to get. So I kind of shied away from most of the major rock publications at that time. So I went into it blindly, found it, and that was part of what really set the stage for this album for me. And I put it on, and it was just great. I mean, everything I had hoped it would be, everything I wanted it to be, it was. Vocals are strong. Every song is great. What's cool about it is the songs are so well crafted. They're so well put together. There's always a part in each song that I look forward to coming up, like that little bridge part, or even the way that Dio just sings a particular line. Just works. It takes a lot of that spirit of heaven and hell, Ma rules, and puts it together in the third album of this lineup. I is a fantastic song. It's a real ass kicker. Probably probably the heaviest song that Black Sabbath Dio era has done. But Letters from Earth, Buried Alive, Master of Insanity. I mean, I don't think there's a bad song. I love TV Crimes. It's got a good driving rhythm to it. Geezer's bass on that. I love Vinny's drums. He's not Bill Ward, but very solid drummer. I like his style, and he works well with that lineup. And that's my number 10. It made the top 10.
All right, cool.
So.
All right, probably my first, maybe slightly controversial pick. Number 10 for me is Never Say Die. I can certainly understand why some people don't care for this record. I kind of like it when bands try different things. I kind of find it interesting when bands are those albums in a band's catalog where you can tell they're a little bit lost. They're trying to find their way, search for something new, something different. It's Ozzy, so of course that wins extra points for me. It was the last of the Ozzy era albums that I bought as a kid when I was first getting into them. And at the time, not having read any reviews of it, I just sort of took it on face value. I love Johnny Blade. I love the title track. What else am I missing here? What's the other? Junior's Eyes, right? I kind of like the synthesizers in it. I think Ozzy actually sounds good on a fair amount of this stuff. I admit it does wander off a little bit, but again, I like it. I like Air Dance. I think there's a lot of great Iommi guitar on this. Shockwave is awesome. Swinging the Chain, the riff on that is super cool. Bill Ward's vocals on it are fun.
Mm-hmm.
Hard Road is maybe the only song on here I could kind of live without. Feels like kind of a little bit of a throwaway for me. Breakout, I actually think it's kind of cool. I like I just like weird things. I like when they're experimenting with different things. Is it something that I would want them to pursue? A horn section on every album? No, but I think it's just kind of a weird little aside. And honestly, I sort of miss from after this point on, from the 80s on, Black Sabbath never really experimented much again. This whole era of Black Sabbath, every album is kind of different. There's always things on the records that are that are different, like they're trying something different. Sometimes it works, like the Super Czar maybe on Sabotage, putting a choir in there, that works. Maybe Breakout with horns doesn't work as much, but I respect and I kind of enjoy just them doing different things. So that's how Never Say Die just makes it into the top 10 for me.
Top 10. Yeah, I mean, in theory, it should have made it higher for me. But I mean, I think a lot of it was that my first impression of it. Well, when we did I think the first episode of our Black Sabbath podcast, we talk about how we got into Black Sabbath, and Never Say Die was my entry, and I had really wanted that album to be. I wanted to start. I'd come from, a few years of listening to Kiss, and I was ready to branch out. I had some kids in my neighborhood, some friends of mine that were listening to Alice Cooper and Rush and Uriah Heep, Ted Nugent, and I decided that I was going to pursue listening to and becoming a fan of Black Sabbath. That was the first album I got. I didn't know what to make of it. I thought maybe it was a little too sophisticated for me at the time. 9 going on 10 years old, probably was, but I was listening to other things too that I was wrapping my head around and being able to appreciate. So I put it aside for a long time. Well, a couple years. Everything seems like a long time when you're that age. But put that album aside for a couple years, and then when I started getting heavily into the Ozzy era, then I revisited it, and still kind of left me with the same impression. Just, I don't know. And the experimentation, I think, is cool when everybody's on board, when it's all part of an agreement. I don't feel like that. Maybe some of it is because well, two reasons. One is I know too much about the background story, and the other thing is you can kind of, it just feels like there's a pulling apart, or there's somebody pushing further to get their agenda out there than the other guys. It just seems very disjointed. And it just kind of comes across in the way the album plays out. I mean, you're right. I mean, Super Czar is definitely was a departure, and there's a couple other songs that we're getting into that are strange for Sabbath in context, but you just feel like they were a product of an agreement amongst the four of them. Maybe somebody led that particular idea, but it seemed like there wasn't any opposition to it. With things that Tony Iommi was doing, I think there was some opposition to it. I don't think anybody else really wanted Black Sabbath to start turning into a jazz band or incorporate jazz progressions and things like that. I know Ozzy, according to what he said in interviews, wasn't into it. In fact, that was like pretty much the last straw. It had been working up to that, but the way that Never Say Die came together, he just wasn't into it. So it wasn't a group effort, and that kind of kills the experimentation to me. It just sounds like one person forcing the others to go along with something, and I don't think that's too great.
Yeah, I can't really argue with any of that. I can understand that. Okay, number 9.
Number 9 is Heaven and Hell. What can we say about Heaven and Hell? It's a phenomenal album. First album of the Dio era. To put myself into that in a context of when this album came out, I was on Team Ozzy. Didn't really want to embrace the Dio era, but it was hard not to because the songs are so good. But my current perspective on it, and I've heard it so many times, but with Black Sabbath, I listen to Black Sabbath and I always listen to it in the moment. I never listen to it as a part of nostalgia. I never listen to it to, remind me of, a particular time frame or something. I listen to all Black Sabbath albums in the moment. And when I listen to Heaven and Hell in the moment, my impression of it is as a transitional record. It was a transition from a band that, like we just said, moving from Never Say Die, where everything was just in complete disarray. It was just a mess. They had to clean house, reorganize, get a focus together, put things in order. And they did that. And the result is Heaven and Hell. Dio brought a lot to the table. It's obvious. The way that he incorporated his voice within the music is completely different from Ozzy. His melodies were different. The subject matter, the lyrics, very different. It was a new era. It was a new start for the band. It was energized. It felt inspired. And because of those factors, it's a great album. But it was still a transition. It was, Children of the Sea, great album. The title track is great. I mean, we can go to song, and I'm not going to have any complaints about any of the songs. Wishing Well, Die Young. I mean, they're all great songs. It hadn't really, the Black Sabbath vibe, the feel hadn't really set in completely yet for me, but it was well on its way. And from where we came from, just a couple years prior to where we are at this time in Heaven and Hell, miraculous. So, great album.
All right. Well, I'm going to echo you here. My number 9 is also Heaven and Hell, which might surprise some people because I think a lot of people would rank Heaven and Hell above, above Mob Rules, honestly. But pretty much the same feeling for you. I mean, this is a 10 out of 10 album, so I can't really say that there's anything I don't like about it. The only reason why it ranks slightly lower than Mob Rules for me is Walk Away, Lady Evil. Maybe they're a little too, to me, that sounds like the Dio influence in the band. They're a little too melodic rock, hard rockish sounding. Reminds me of like some of the things in Rainbow, like Do You Close Your Eyes and
Yep. Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. But it has Heaven and Hell, the song Heaven and Hell, which is one of the biggest metal anthems of all time.
Sure.
Neon Nights, Children of the Sea, I Love Lonely Is the Word, Die Young is amazing. So it's still a phenomenal record, but we're at the point here in this top 10 where really from here on out, everything is a 10 out of 10 for me. So
I embrace Lady Evil. I think it's cool. I like Geezer's bass in the beginning, and it has that, that Witch's Valley. It has that, takes you into the atmosphere. It creates a little bit of a picture in your mind. I think that's pretty cool. Walk Away, yeah. I mean, I agree with you there. It definitely sounds like some of those more fun, looser songs from the Rainbow era that Dio probably brought in there, and that's one of the reasons why I feel it's a transitional record. I think there's too much of okay, well, this was probably brought in by Geezer, and this was probably brought in by Dio, and this is a little bit left over from Dio's era prior to that when he was in Rainbow. So that's what makes it a transitional album for me, and it doesn't really hurt it, but it makes it a little less complete than the one that would follow.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we are number 8.
Okay, number 8 is Sabotage for me. That is a great album, as they all are from this point on. Very angry, heavy. It's a special album. It doesn't sound like anything. And I guess when you get right down to it, there isn't really an album, a Black Sabbath album, that sounds like another one. But this one's really unique. It has a lot of authenticity behind it in the way that the anger comes forth in the lyrics, the rawness, the heaviness. Ozzy, his performance on that, he's just straining, but not in a feeble way. Straining as in he's just completely in the moment. The lyrics that he's singing, he's feeling, he's belting it out. Everybody is just on top of it. It's a high energy album. It's a dark album, and it's the sequence is perfect. Don't Start Too Late, Into Symphony of the Universe. It's huge. It's epic. Super Czar. Very strange song for Black Sabbath, but it works. I mean, in the sequence, it's really, really cool. Some of the sound effects, the laughter from like Mental Asylum is in the Writ. Megalomania it's just a great album. But again, the thing that really I think is the hallmark of this album is the energy, the anger, feels very sincere. It's authentic. I know there were some things going on in the background, business-wise. They were pretty pissed off about, management and some of the things that were happening in the business end of band matters, and that manifested itself in the creative aspect of this album. And I appreciate that because it makes it a very sincere album. But in addition to that, it makes it a very heavy metal album for the 70s, 1975. That's a pretty damn heavy album.
For sure, indeed. All right, my number 8 is Technical Ecstasy. Like we said already, we're in the 10 out of 10 territory here. I know that there's some people. I know that there's some people that don't like this album. I've always loved it. Love the album cover. Backstreet Kids is great. I love You Won't Change Me. I think that's a great Ozzy performance. The strings and that, they're experimenting at this point, but it's completely working for me. It's All Right is fun. Gypsy is cool. All Moving Parts Stand Still. Maybe the only song on here that I don't really care for is Rock and Roll Doctor. I know a lot of, and I like it. It's just, I don't know. She's Gone is great. Dirty Women. I mean, just the whole thing. I mean, it's totally works for me. I think everybody sounds great on this. The riffs sound great. It's them experimenting and trying different things. Like All Moving Parts Stand Still has kind of a funky thing going on. There's like a clavinet piano thing in the background, the strings, and the Day Out, and a few things here and there. But it totally works for me. I think it's great.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that one a lot pretty soon. I agree with everything you said, and then I have a lot more to add. I mean, it's a real special album.
I know you. I know. That's a favorite for you. Yeah. All right, we're at number 7.
Yeah, 7 for me. Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. That's again another really, really strong album. The thing that with the great songs, there isn't. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. Fluff is kind of. It's fluff. It's filler, but it is cool in sequence. I wouldn't want to hear the album without it. Who Are You is an experimental synthesizer thing that, I mean, at this stage of the game, if it was absent, I would miss it. But it's not really. It's not really a good song. But the rest of the material is top notch. Great, well-written songs. The performances are great. Ozzy sounds great. I love the production. Mike Butcher produced this, as well as Sabotage, we just talked about. He really seems to, in the time that he was working with the band, really seemed to be able to extract a lot of the band's personality, a lot of energy from the performances, and get it on record. And I appreciate that. It's very different from Sabotage. It's a little bit more confident, a little less angry, maybe because whatever it was making them angry hadn't happened yet. Maybe it was well on its way of doing that, but it hadn't quite happened yet. So it's a confident album. It's semi-experimental. I like the layers, the production layers, especially on Looking for Today. Spiral Architect, great song. There's a horn section, there's strings, but it all comes together in a really cool way that doesn't take it away from what I expect to hear from Black Sabbath. Killing Yourself to Live is an awesome song. That little bridge part and the reference, whether you're into that or not, I think what was cool about that, it was unabashed. This is who we are. This is what we have to say. This is our lifestyle. This is real. I appreciate that, whether you are into that sort of thing or not. The way that it's inserted, I think, gives it a real sense of authenticity and realism, which I think is really important. Title track, killer. The tone when it goes into that bridge part that Omi digs deep, it's like he's just digging digging, this really like deep hole. Almost the way the guitar and the bass complement each other and just make that such a deep, rich tone. It's really, really heavy, very heavy album overall. But it has, it rides a variety of emotions. There's dirty, heavy, you know, hard rock, heavy metal vibe to it. Then there's Spiral Architect, where it gets a little whimsical. It gets a little bit, um, progressive in a way. There's a little bit of a progressive element. Um, Rick Wakeman plays keyboards. I believe on Sabra Cadabra, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I know that the story goes that they were recording, Yes was recording at the same time, Tales from Topographic Oceans, which is an album I love by Yes. It's one of my favorite albums, but evidently Rick Wakeman was bored out of his skull while they were recording that album. So he would often visit, once he figured out that Black Sabbath was in the studio down the hall and had, brushed by them and talked and became chummy with them, he would frequently leave the Tales from Topographic Ocean sessions once he was done playing his parts, and he would go down there and hang out with the Sabbath guys and have a good time. If you ever read Rick Wakeman's book, it's really funny. I recommend it. He seems like a really cool guy. Not pretentious at all, but very, very talented. And you would probably expect him to be pretentious, but he's not. So he lent his talents to Sabra Cadabra, and it's really cool. It's cool to hear Rick Wakeman in that context. Moreover, it's really cool for Black Sabbath to be in a position material-wise where something that they did would lend themselves to the keyboards of Rick Wakeman. I think that works to the advantage of this album, that it's wide open. A lot of things are going on in it, and it's all successful. That's what I think about Sabbath Bloody Sabbath.
Awesome. All right, my number 7 is Mob Rules. So this edges out Heaven and Hell a little bit for me, just because to me the album feels a little bit heavier, and some of the things that you said, it feels like they hadn't 100% found themselves on Heaven and Hell, but it sort of all comes together for that era of the band on this. Turn Up the Nights. There's no song on here that I don't like. Maybe a deep cut for me would be Over and Over. I think that's an awesome way to end the record. I love the way it kind of goes out. The title track is just amazing. E5150, the sound effects, Voodoo is great. Falling Off the Edge of the World. Maybe the only song on here that feels a little bit just kind of jammy is Slipping Away. That sounds like it was just sort of like them jamming, but it works. Sign of the Southern Cross, one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs, one of my favorite Dio performances. You've heard me say this a bunch of times. The 8 Miles High, About to Fall.
Yeah, I get chills thinking about the song, let alone listening to the song.
I know. That is just the definition of epic. The drums on that, Vinny's drum sound on that. Vinny, maybe this is another reason too why this ranks a little bit higher. The drums, Vinny's drumming on this is just perfect for this record. And I think of like Sign of the Southern Cross, where it's not like he's doing anything really technical. It's just crack, it's just big, huge drums. Classic Vinny Appice type drum fills. Do, do, do. Go, 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 big toms, and just the whole record just has a really big, massive sound. Falling Off the Edge of the World is the same way. It starts off slow, and when that riff kicks in, it's just so intense. Over and Over then just has this, the way it just takes the record out. It's just absolutely great. Turn Up the Night maybe is like I would give Neon Nights I'd let Neon Nights win the opener. Turn Up the Night feels a little bit like a notch below Neon Nights maybe, but it's still great. And the title track is just an absolute ripper. Dio sounds amazing on it. His lyrics are amazing. Geezer's bass sounds great. Iommi's riffs are just absolutely crushing. Just a fantastic record. The album cover is it is a piece of art. And it looks great, the whole package. Country Girl, a song often sometimes maligned, but I think it's just great. I
Yeah,
think it's
I
super
agree.
catchy. I think the lyrics, I know sometimes people think the lyrics but I think it's just great. The whole idea of like an evil country girl type thing, stealing your soul, that kind of vibe. It works for me. The riff is super great. Finney Appice, the way he plays on that, it's just great. I love it. Dio at his best. The whole band just really clicking. Really wishes that they could have kept that chemistry rolling for at least another couple albums, because man, where could they have gone?
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna have a lot to say about that pretty soon. So,
All right, well, we are number 6 then.
okay, number 6, Technical Ecstasy. This is an album that I love. Some days when I listen to this, I swear, I mean, I say to myself, yeah, this is my favorite Black Sabbath album. And then I listen to the volume 4, or I listen to Paranoid or something, and I think, well, maybe it's not, but it's definitely one of my favorites. One of my favorites for a few reasons. I love the production of it. It really has a lot of atmosphere. When I listen to it and I just kind of get absorbed in it, it takes me into the context of the album. It reminds me, oddly enough, a lot in its production value of Genesis, the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. To me, it has a similar production quality. Of course, musically it's very different, but it kind of has that space, that open feel to it that I get from The Lamb Lies Down. I think that there isn't a bad song on it. A lot of people, don't like Rock and Roll Doctor. I think it's a great song. It's a fun song. They sound like they're into it. In the context of the album and the sequence of the album, I look forward to hearing it. I think it's cool. It's okay to not have everything so dire and dramatic and heavy. It's okay to have a song that's fun, and the message is cool. Rock and roll is the doctor. Rock and roll will cure what ails you. And there's some truth to that. So that song doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I like it. Backstreet Kids, great song. That riff, that kicks in. The autobiographical sort of nod in that to their upbringing, to where they come from. It's authentic. It's real. Feel it. This is one of the albums that a lot of people think that it's one they shouldn't listen to, because it's kind of grouped in with, only the first 6 albums matter. You can only trust yourself in the first 6 albums. I don't know who started that or why. Obviously not somebody that's really into Black Sabbath, because, the only albums you can really listen to are the first 20 and all the compilations and all the live albums. But yeah, so I think it was a foregone conclusion to most people that are getting into Black Sabbath that they're supposed to avoid Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die. Never Say Die, I wouldn't necessarily say that they were wrong about. Technical Ecstasy, I would probably urge them to listen without prejudice, and which is hard for people to do because the reputation precedes it a lot of times. The album cover, I think, is a little, a bit of a turn off for people. It doesn't have like a heavy, dark type of theme to it, so it's not really, it's not an album that you would look at the cover and think, oh man, I want to listen to that album. It's just kind of stark. Looks like a Hypnosis album cover. It's not Hypnosis. It's Storm Thurgenson that did that, who also did Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, well, he was Hypnosis, right?
Yeah, he was, exactly.
Yeah,
He
so
wasn't Hypnosis, so there's a correlation there. But anyway, Ozzy's vocals on She's Gone, phenomenal. I think it's one of the best songs he's ever sung in Black Sabbath. He conveys the emotion in the lyrics. I don't know who wrote the lyrics. I don't think it was Ozzy, probably Geezer. But Ozzy sells it, and almost at one point sounds like he's crying while he's singing it.
Yeah.
Obviously very effective for the subject matter. Crystal clear. His voice is really on point. Whereas on Sabotage, he kind of strains and you can hear a little bit of a hoarseness on certain phrases and certain things that he's singing. It works to that album's advantage because of the subject matter and the feel and the spirit of the album. With this, it feels more controlled. Band probably was at the very early stages of breaking apart, but you don't feel that. I feel it is an album that has some experimentation going on, but they feel like they're all in on it together. It feels like a happy, confident album to me. That's the vibe that I get. But I love the riffs. I love the songs. I love the vocals, Ozzy's vocals. Um, and I think for the first time, up to this point, I think it's probably Iommi's best soloing. The solos are really well constructed, especially on Dirty Women. That's such a phenomenal guitar solo. Probably the highlight of the song. The song itself is great. Gypsy, the drum intro, really cool. The atmosphere in that song, the tempo changes. Yeah, it's just a great album, and I think it's unfortunate that so many people don't give it the time that it deserves. But anybody I talk to, I tell them, check it out. It's a great album. Don't get past what everybody tells you. Get past the whole, only first 6 albums. I put a Facebook page up, Technical Ecstasy Appreciation Society, and occasionally I'll like search the internet and find cool pictures of them, recording this or something. And I think it's cool era. I think visually, it's a cool era for the band. It's when Ozzy was in his full fringe regalia.
Yeah.
His hair was long, the peace sign was in place, the fringe, the white fringe, the black shirt with Ozzy. He had various outfits, the boots,
Yeah.
When you see a picture of Black Sabbath from this era, it's like that. Wow, that's cool. That looks like Black Sabbath. The stage that they had like a painting of like a castle, so it had like that Hammer horror movie atmosphere to it. It was just to me, everything was just on point. And yeah, so that's my number 6, Technical Ecstasy.
Yeah, and I've said this before that I think some of the problem is that the band often talks down Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die because of where their heads were at that time. And if that album, let's say It's All Right, turned into a big radio hit and it made that album sell millions and millions of copies, I think the band's attitude towards the record would have been different. It would have been more, oh, well, this record was a hard record to put out, but man, it was worth it because look, it sold millions and millions of copies. But because it didn't sell that well and it was a hard album to put out, the band kind of looks down on it. And then as history sort of writes a narrative around it that I just think I agree with you, it's just not accurate, and then it gets in people's minds before they even hear these things, especially nowadays with the internet. When I was buying these things, I was just buying it. It was just another Sabbath record. I didn't have any preconceived notions walking. I didn't know any backstories or what any of the critics thought of these things. So I liked it just as much as anything else. It's just, unfortunately, through time, like you said, it gets sort of this story behind it that like, oh, well, those Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die. You just want to listen to the first 6, which is really a shame. And I think people who are real, hardcore Sabbath fans, they realize and appreciate what's going on there. And it's a great album to be able to, when you've heard, obviously Paranoid is higher up on my list, but there's times when I want to go to an album like Technical Ecstasy where I haven't heard these songs a million times, where it feels like you can sort of hear things on that record. There's a lot of overdubbing guitars and different things going on, so it's a fun headphone record. So yeah, I agree with you. It is a great record.
Cool.
Okay, number 6 for me is the first album, Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath. Hey, it's got tons of atmosphere. The song Black Sabbath, incredible. The Rain, The Tolling Bell, The Wizard, NIB, Wicked World, Behind the Wall, Sleep. It's all great. The only reason why I didn't rank it a little bit higher, although I like the extended guitar solo stuff in it, Would I have liked to have another song squeezed in there, another original song? Probably. So that's kind of why I couldn't rank it any higher than that. But I mean, I love this record. It's a 10 out of 10.
Mhm.
The album cover is amazing. Even though there's a cover song on here, I think it works and it makes total sense. We talked about this on our
Yeah.
Black Sabbath podcast. So hey, we're nitpicking at this point in the
Yeah.
in the list here. So that's
Yeah.
the reason why it ranked a little lower for me, was a little bit of the extended guitar stuff, which I do like, but I just, maybe wish that there was a little more focus. They were still searching for their sound a little bit on this record.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see that. That's fair enough. It's a pretty fair assessment on that.
Okay. We are at 5.
We're in the top 5 now. Okay. I would have, from 1 through 5 was probably, it was the most difficult thing to sort out in this entire list. Particularly the placement of Technical Ecstasy and my number 5 pick, which, man, if you'd have asked me 2 weeks ago, I probably would have put it higher. But as of now, number 5 is Mob Rules. Not only is it just an epic album, everything that you said I completely agree with. I would add, though, that for me personally, it's probably my favorite heavy metal album. Not just a great Black Sabbath album, but heavy metal. It transcends the Sabbath confine, if you want to call it that. It transcends the band Black Sabbath and goes even further than that for me. I think it contains all the necessary elements to make all happening, all firing at the same time, and it makes it my favorite heavy metal album. The production quality is where I would like to hear Born Again. It has the heavy bassy feel. Geezer's bass is sick.
Yeah.
You know, Vinny's drums are, like you said, he's like a caveman. It's just heavy, dense, but once in a while he'll throw in a fill, and it's his skill comes across. It's not just a basic hacker. He's obviously a good drummer, but what I appreciate about a lot of drummers when they do this is when they serve the song, they have the skill to play above it and beyond, but they stay true to the song. And there might be a subtle thing that is part of their identity as a player, as a musician, but it doesn't overwhelm the song. Benny's there. In addition to that, the tone of his drums, the way that he just hits them hard, blends perfectly with the bass. Iommi's tone on this is great. Dio's voice, when you were talking about, I guess it was Slipping Away, he has a harshness, especially in Mob Rules. He has a harshness in his voice. Turn Up the Night, too. He has a harshness in his voice where he, like, snarls. I've never heard that before. Obviously, in anything, it's not on Heaven and Hell. It's not on anything after that. It's something that's only part of Mob Rules. He has, like, this snarl. I remember I was driving around with my friend in high school, and I popped this on. I think we were listening to Rush, and I had this on the other side of a 90-minute tape, and it flipped over auto reverse and started playing. He got freaked out. He said, "Man, you gotta turn this off. This sounds really satanic." I said, "It's not satanic. It's Black Sabbath. I mean, listen to the lyrics, He's like, "No, man, it's not the lyrics. There's just something about it. It's you gotta turn it off. It's distracting me. I'm gonna crash my car." Which I thought was pretty funny. I laughed about that for a while. But it does. It has kind of an evil vibe to it. It's the dark, heavy, plotting. Dio's voice sounds kind of snarled. He's got like this little bit of a reverb to it. The whole album has like kind of a reverb sheen, which brings me to the next thing. Martin Birch just did a phenomenal job on this album. And I think for Martin Birch, R.I.P., died recently, fortunately. Great producer, produced so many phenomenal albums, cornerstones of hard rock, heavy metal, and just rock and roll in general. But at this period, he really hit his stride where he just dialed in a great heavy metal sound. And this album in particular, he just nailed it. I also think that Boys for Colt, Fire of Unknown Origin, he nails that one. When he started working with Iron Maiden, he got Maiden dialed in really well. But yeah, Martin Birch does a phenomenal job on this album. And the songs, of course, as you mentioned, I love Voodoo, the melody, the riff, one of my favorite Iommi riffs, the riff in Voodoo. Falling Off the Edge of the World, where it starts out slow and it kicks into high gear on that really awesome riff and then takes it out. Awesome. Sign of the Southern Cross, murky, gets the feeling like you're on a ship and you're in the water and it's dark in the moonlight and you can see it rippling off the waves. Get that feel when I listen to it. It's a heavy, dense, dark album, but its production just works so well with it. I wish Born Again sounded like this. If we're gonna attribute these qualities, dark, epic, dense, this is how that should sound. There's optimum clarity. The performances are spot on, but they really serve the songs. It all comes together. The band is completely firing on all cylinders. Like I said, Heaven and Hell is like the transitional album. It's a great album, but it's like you're thinking, okay, this is a great album. I like what's happening here. I like that Dio is in Black Sabbath. I can feel this happening. It's going to move into something hopefully really good on the next album, and it does. So that's what's so cool about this. They fulfill the promise of what they're capable of doing. In spades on Country Girl. Let me just say one thing about Country Girl. That I love that riff. Some people don't like that song. I think that they acquaint it to what our definition of a country girl is, like a Laura Ingalls, or something. But that's not what it is at all. It's basically, from what I understand in interviews and articles I've read, refers to the Black Country, which is their section of England.
Right.
A woman who's just bad.
Right.
Bad seed, just bad influence, bad woman to get tangled up with. That's what the country girl. She's from the Black Country. She's from that part of England. So when you take that into consideration, it kind of changes the context about it. Because when I was a kid, I thought, I had this image of like a Laura Ingalls running down a little house. God, that's just a strange song title, Country Girl. So it's a little bit of a obscure reference for Americans, but in the English context, it probably was much more effective.
Yeah.
The riff in that is killer. Great lyrics. Dio's on point. I don't know what else I can say about it. I love it. It's a great album.
Absolutely. Okay. My number 5 is Sabotage. This is them experimenting to a degree, and whereas maybe they slightly, or some people would say really missed the mark on Never Say Die, to me it really works on this, and I just love it. Symptom of the Universe, what can you say? One of the heaviest songs from anybody.
Yeah.
I'm Hole in the Sky is great. I love the little like acoustic guitar, Don't Start Too Late thing. Megalomania is amazing. I love the thrill of it all, the way it has kind of almost like a funky thing, and Ozzy singing way up high reminds me of Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, the song. Super Czar with the choir thing. It's just as a kid hearing that stuff like that for the first time, I was just like, whoa, this is just so scary and creepy. The whole album has a weird, they're sort of floating here with the smoke and the Am I Going Insane with the laughing and the crazy sound effects and the way it fades into the writ with the bass at the beginning there. And it's just, oh man, it's just absolutely great. I just love it. It's super heavy. There's so much, it's a fun headphone album. They're experimenting. There's different things on here, but to me, it totally works. It's just an awesome record. So that's my number 5. So we are 4. We are on 4 then.
Okay, 4 for me is Black Sabbath self-titled album. Like I said, it was really hard to put these in order, so I really thought about it. And I think this is one that also benefits a lot from the atmosphere that's built um, through the sequence, through the production value, through the performances. And there are some, we've talked about this in great detail in our podcast. We dedicated an entire album to talk about some of the background, some of the things that were going on at the time, how the band was playing relentlessly live as often as they could, sometimes a couple sets a day, sometimes 3 sets a day. They had all these songs well rehearsed. They went in, knocked it out in 12 hours. They basically came in, played it like they were playing a live show. So that feeling is there. Feels like it's a live album in the studio. It gives you an idea of what you could have probably expected from Black Sabbath live circa 1969, 1970, which I think is really cool. I think that it serves the purpose of an album, which is basically to give you a recorded document of what this band sounds like if you were to see them live. Um, with that being the intent, records have moved so far away from that and become conceptual and, very dependent on production values and overdubs and things like that. But I think the core essence of an album was always with the intended purpose to give you an idea of what this band would sound like if you were able to see them live. Certainly, if you were able to see them live, they would probably prefer that. But if you can't, or if you love the band so much when you saw them live, here's an album that you can listen to anytime you want until we can see you again perform for you. So that, the Black Sabbath self-titled album, is from that era when live performance was more popular than the recorded media. And the dark vibe, it has a lot of blues to it. Ozzy's voice, sounds different. Well, it is what it is. As things move from that point on, it gets in a higher tonal range and it sounds different. But for this first album, obviously he doesn't have a lot of experience. He's trying to sound a little bit deeper, probably trying to sound like a little bit more bluesy. Certainly Iommi was, when they started out as a blues band, things kind of took the course that they did. They essentially defined heavy metal. They became the heavy metal band. They invented heavy metal, born from the blues, which was probably their original intention. The album is bluesy, but it's beyond a bluesy album. It's a heavy metal album. It's the first heavy metal album. The playing is phenomenal. It sounds like no one else at that time. It's a dark album. It's a scary album. The title track certainly, there's a horror element to it, which would pretty much define them from that point on. And it's a really important album. And it's an album that I can always listen to. I may not prefer it as much as 3 of the other ones that come before it on my list, but it's always a good listen. So that comes in at number 4 for me.
All right. My number 4 is Master of Reality. Hey, what can you say? It's the birth of so many, Black Sabbath birthed so many different genres. Maybe this is the stoner rock one where they created that genre. There's just so many great songs on this. Children of the Grave, one that gets played a lot, but I never get tired of it. Lord of this World, Sweet Leaf, After Forever, Into the Void. I mean, the main riff in that song is one of the heaviest riffs of all time. It's just incredible. They tuned down for the first time on this record, so it has that really dark, sludgy feel. Yeah. Every song works. Embryo, even the instrumentals here, like Embryo, the way Embryo leads into Children of the Grave, Orchid is really cool. Solitude, kind of a Planet Caravan vibe, but in the context of the record, it just completely works. And it's just super heavy record. Iommi's, they're still at this point, just not a lot of overdubs or anything going on, so it's just still raw. It's just still heavy. Ozzy sounds great. The band is just really, they're becoming popular. They're picking up steam at this point. They're firing on all cylinders. Just a great heavy record.
Yeah, I agree with all those points. I'll talk about that in a few minutes too.
All right, we are at number 3.
Number 3 for me is Volume 4. I don't even know where to begin with this album as far as describing it. When I compiled this list, it was somewhere I knew this album would be in the top 3 for me. And like I said, I would probably organize this list a little differently if I'm going according to my preferences. Um, but I compose this list primarily as if somebody said, "Hey, I've never heard Black Sabbath before. Where should I start?" And I would give them this is the list I would give them. Start here, buy this one first, this one second, and this one third, so on and so forth, until you got to number 20, which would be forbidden, unfortunately. But anyway, uh, Volume 4 is a heavy album to go through it song by song. Wow, probably it's ahead of its time. It's it's similar to Mob Rules in a way where the heaviness for its time and its context is so far removed from what anybody else was doing at that time that it makes it really unique just in that aspect. Likewise, 10 years later, well, 11 years later, or 9 years later, Mob Rules would kind of have that same effect where it was a heavy, dense, dark record. Volume 4 is that for 1972. Um, Under the Sun is a monster. Under the Sun is probably
Yeah.
every bit as heavy as anything any stoner rock band has done or will ever do.
Yeah.
Um, and it's amazing because I hear bands and I'll be listening to like Sleep or something. I'll be like, yeah, man, that's pretty heavy, but it's not as heavy as Under the Sun. It's trying to be, but it's not. And the drums on that, I love those triplets that Bill does, and that happy hippie part, and that one of those characteristic idiosyncratic Black Sabbath change gears quickly and do this thing and put it in the middle of the song for no apparent reason, but it works so perfectly. They do that on Under the Sun to contrast the heavy, dark, plodding vibe of the rest of the song. But in that part, in that inserted part, and those triplets that Bill does, it's phenomenal. It's like we're talking next level. That particular 1972. Now, not to take away anything from Carmine Appice, because he's a brilliant drummer and probably doesn't get quite the credit he deserves. But likewise, I think Bill Ward is in that area that Carmine Appice is, and especially on this album. I think it's his best drumming. And oddly enough, this is the album that I think the rumor has that he almost got fired because he was having difficulty playing cornucopia.
Yeah.
So he couldn't
Cornucopia.
figure out how to wrap his head around that, but he did, and he did it in an amazing way. And the drums are perfect on this album. Uh, Bill Ward I saw something on YouTube where Bill Ward was interviewed about his art. He was at an exhibition. He made an appearance, and there was a group of kids around him, and adults, but predominantly kids, fans, Black Sabbath fans. I think it was somewhere in South America, if I'm not mistaken. One of the kids asked him about those triplets in Under the Sun. And it was such a random question. It had nothing to do with why he was there or the purpose or any of his art. Bill, without batting an eye, he just answered. He was very kind and considerate to the kid, and he was talking about it, and he said, he's like, basically the question was, what influenced you to do that? And Bill said, Ozzy, Geezer, and Tony. I just reacted to what they were doing. It's what the music forced me to do, and I was luckily I was able to do what I intended to do, and it's such an awesome part of that song. Otherwise, I mean, Wheels of Confusion, it's bluesy, it's heavy, it's oppressive. If you feel Ozzy's pain in the way that he's singing it, it's downtrodden, sets the tone great. Wheels of Confusion, that riff is awesome. There's a big backstory about their lifestyle choices at this particular time in their career. Maybe that adds some of the urgency to this album. a lot of different things going on. The creative juices were flowing. The song structures were innovative. Frank Zappa himself loved Supernaut. Certainly Frank Zappa wasn't one who was too easy to impress musically, for a lot of different reasons, being a gifted musician that he was and genius. He was really, really into Supernaut, and Supernaut's a great song, killer riff. Yeah, every song on it's a winner. And but when I come back to it and I think of Under the Sun, I'm thinking, man, this is just so ahead of its time. It defined heavy metal, stoner rock, doom metal,
Mhm.
3 genres in just that one song that it pioneered. So for that alone, definitely a remarkable album.
For sure. Okay, my number 3 is the mighty Paranoid. Uh, I mean, what can you say about this album? It's got all their big hits on it, and even though there may be times where maybe I'm a little tired of some of those songs, I can still put this album on and still enjoy it. We just did a podcast episode on it, and I revisited the record, and I still love it. The mix is just perfect. Bill Ward sounds great on it. Everybody sounds great on it. War Pigs, all-time heavy metal classic. Even the slightly deeper cuts, things like Hand of Doom, are great. Iron Man, one of the greatest heavy metal riffs of all time, up there with Smoke on the Water and Fairies Wear Boots. The song Paranoid is just great. It was my first Black Sabbath album, so it has a special place there too. It's their most popular album, their best-selling album. Just a great record. The band, it's a simple record. There aren't a ton of overdubs or anything going on the record, but it just rocks, man. It's just the band on fire, great feel. Band just totally, yeah. Chemistry, chemistry would be the word. Their minds are all melted together. They're just really one unit at this point, whereas maybe later on they started to splinter off and different people had different ideas. But on this, you could just tell they're young, they're hungry, they're focused. It's just a great record.
Yeah, I'll have to get that one. I haven't heard it yet.
Is that by Black Sabbath? I thought that was by.
Yeah, I think so. I'm never really interested in that one.
All right. Well, let's see here. We are now down to the top 2. Number 2.
Okay. So number 2 for me is Master of Reality. I think going with the premise of what I would recommend somebody to check out after just first getting into Black Sabbath, I would say that Master of Reality is essential. Sweet Leaf, Children of the Grave, After Forever, Into the Void. It's all killer, no filler. You could even look at, some of like the interludes, Orchid, Solitude, quiet song, but it just has a really cool vibe. And the sequence of the album is perfect, but that Iommi tone, like you said, he start to tune down. So that aspect is introduced on this album. The riffs, when I listen to it, I love the way that the guitar tone sounds. I love Geezer's bass. It's very rich, but it's well defined. Bill's drums are on point, pretty much, following in the tradition of what he did on Paranoid. He's further developing his style, a lot of swing. He's on top of it. Some of the things he does, some of his solutions to some of the riffs that Tony brings to the table, really interesting, very creative. Bill Ward's a great drummer. Certainly on this album, he exhibits that. Ozzy's voice is cool. He would have better performances as time went on, but I think it's very effective on this album. It's an important album for Black Sabbath, and it's an important album in the history of heavy metal and hard rock. and certainly something that I would say would be essential for anybody who was just checking out Black Sabbath, that they would have to hear right away.
Yeah, can't argue with that. Can't argue with that. All right, my number 2, Black Sabbath, Volume 4. It's just a lot of the things that you said. This is just such a heavy, heavy album. Wheels of Confusion, Snowblind, Tomorrow's Dream, even Changes, even though it's kind of a left field thing, it just sort of works for me on the record. Cornucopia, Laguna Sunrise, another instrumental, St. Vitus Dance, and like you said, Under the Sun, definitely so heavy. I mean, yeah, Mount Rushmore of heavy songs. It's got to be Under the Sun, and just the whole record. It just has a real kind of it's a slightly cloudy vibe to it, but it's just man, it's so dark sounding at this point. The Vices are starting to catch up with the band a little bit there, but it still hasn't completely taken over their lives. But man, just heavy riffs all over this. Ozzy sounds great. Wheels of Confusion, Snowblind is a Sabbath classic. All the things you love about Black Sabbath is all over this record. The way they can do different things, even within the songs themselves. There's so many just subtle little changes. Black Sabbath was never a verse chorus band. You know, they always had weird tempo shifts and riffs coming in here and there, and it's just the band working as one unit to these arrangements, and just such a heavy album, trippy album too. You know, songs like Wheels of Confusion, the way that whole end section kind of kicks in, it's real like
the straightener. So cool.
Yeah,
I love that.
It's right, and it's kind of trippy, and it has that FX. You know, it's just just weirdness, but it just all works, man. And it's just such a heavy album, so many great riffs. Iommi, the godfather of the riff. It doesn't, nobody touches him when it comes to the guitar riff in this album. It's just, this will bulldoze. I don't care who you are, any modern band that thinks they're heavy. This album came out in '72, and it still can wipe them all out.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've heard anything as heavy.
All right, we are at our number 1 pick. What is I guess by process of elimination, but here we are.
Okay, so with the premise that if somebody said, again, I keep repeating this, what should I want to get in Black Sabbath, what should I get first? Okay, well, you can't go any further until you've heard War Pigs. You can't get into anything else in the catalog or the discography until you hear Iron Man, until you hear Paranoid, or Fairies Wear Boots. These are essential songs. You have to start here. That's what I would strongly suggest. So, with that in mind, these songs being so iconic as they are, puts it in the highest ranking. There's no other album in the Black Sabbath discography that has songs that are as essential as War Pigs, Iron Man, Fairies Wear Boots, the title track, Electric Funeral, Hand of Doom. You know, these are all top tier Black Sabbath songs. And as we talked about in I guess our second podcast, this is an album that, while some of them are, especially in the Dio era, mostly referential to heavy metal, this is an album that transcends heavy metal, classic rock, contemporary rock. You could hear it on, some insight into that is just to kind of flip around on satellite radio. FM radio, not so much, especially since there's not really that many stations anymore that actually play music, but Sirius or XM radio is a good way to kind of get a barometer on how important Black Sabbath is in the context of music in general, and all the different radio stations, Octane and Liquid Metal and heavy vinyl and deep cuts. And it's like, you can play any of the songs from Paranoid, probably not any other album, but definitely Paranoid, on probably about 10 satellite radio stations. It's an important album. We got into the history, the historical context of this album when we did our second or third podcast dedicated entirely to this album. The production is great. The performance is great. The band was hungry. One thing that sticks in my mind when I think of Paranoid, and it's a recent memory actually, because I just watched this, I think, in preparation for our podcast. It was the classic album documentary, Paranoid. And one thing, there's a lot of useful information if you're, really into Black Sabbath the way that we are. We hang on all these interviews and, these little factoids about, where they were in context of these particular albums in this point in history. The one thing that really stays with me the most, when they were wrapping up, and I guess the question, they don't show the interviewer asking the question, but the question was apparently, what do you think about Paranoid? Bill, the director, Bill Ward. And just the way he says it, like, it's real. It's real. I love the way he says that. It's real, and he says it with utmost conviction, but very nonchalant. And I believe him. I believe he remembers, the important things about that era, about that recording session, which is what the documentary was focused on. And Tony Iommi's interviewed in that as well. So was Ozzy. So was Geezer. All have fond memories. It was a high point of the band. Second album, they're excited. Creative juices are flowing. Songs are coming together. Well on their way to establishing themselves as probably the most important band in heavy metal, inventing heavy metal, basically. So while I've heard it at least a million times, and a lot of these songs, when I, speak of the virtues of how many radio stations you can hear these songs on, I'm not overlooking the fact that also indicates that it's played out pretty well. But it's important, I think, that the songs are that transcendent from one genre to the next. And, I can always come back to it. An important time when I got a little bit burned out on it, but, step away from it for a little while and come back to it. It's still great. Fairies Wear Boots. Paranoid, the title track, probably one of my favorite songs of all time by any band. Title track, Paranoid. Love it. That's my number one album, Paranoid.
All right. My number one, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath.
Okay.
For me, this is Black Sabbath just at the peak of their creative powers. Every song on this is amazing to me. They're kind of experimenting a little bit. You've got some different things on here, like Who Are You, which to me as a young kid hearing this for the first time, though, that's the type of thing that would blow my mind, was a song like Here Are You, Who Are You, with the weird synthesizer in the middle section that sounds like a classical piece, and the way Ozzy sings it. The song Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath is just amazing. Iommi's riffs are, they're just so heavy, in that whole middle section. The do do da do da do da do is just heaviest riffs of all time, up there with Under the Sun. That when the way Ozzy comes in, Wicked, is just absolutely great. National Acrobat, Fluff. Even though again it's sort of a departure from the rest of the album, to me it just adds to the heaviness of it when you have these shades of light and dark. Sabracadabra, amazing. Killing Yourself to Live, Looking for Today, and I love Spiral Architect with the strings, and again it's melodic, but it's just also an amazing way to end the record with the clapping that they, makes it sound like it's in a live audience. It's so majestic and so regal. And I remember a story where Ozzy says, because he was attempting to do the lyrics for Spiral Architect. He couldn't come up with anything. So he calls Geezer and goes, all right, I'll call you back. And like, he calls him back like an hour later, and he's like, Officers of Madness, and he starts reading the lyrics to him, and Ozzy is like, he was just blown away. But that's just where Sabbath was at this point, that they could just do an amazing record like this, and it wasn't forced. It wasn't like they had to spend 2 years in the studio to pull this off, or
Yeah.
they had to have some producer hold their hand through it. They were just, their creative juices were totally flowing at this point.
Yeah.
The lawyers and the managers hadn't soured everything for them yet.
Yeah.
The album cover, absolutely
cover.
iconic. The back cover, my other one, I don't have the gatefold with me right now. Just everything about it is just amazing. I love it. It's a great headphone record. It's just such a great album. Just an amazing album, and my favorite Black Sabbath album.
Very cool. That's a good one. Yeah, I mean, everything you said, I agree with when I've talked about it earlier. But I did forget to mention A National Acrobat. What a great song that is.
I love the lyrics in it.
So
I love
good.
the intro with this sort of classical-ish type guitar thing. And just the way the whole thing builds with the strings and sort of the fake ending, the crowd claps, and then the drum beat that fades out. It sounds like you're at, I always picture like, you're being at some Carnegie Hall or something like that,
It's not like a rambunctious heavy metal crowd. It sounds like everybody's seated and they're clapping very politely but enthusiastically. Yeah, it has that feeling. That's what I always thought. Like I would expect to see people at an opera, that sort of applause. It was really effective in a conceptual way. Again, you mentioned the lyrics. I don't think I mentioned the lyrics in this album, but you're right. I'm sure Ozzy was blown away. They're deep, they're poetic, they're creative, very open to interpretation, and I'm sure that there's been quite a few people like myself who've listened to this album at various points in their life and drew some personal relevance to some of the things that are some of the phrases in these songs and things like that. And I think that that's really important. It's really important to make a connection, personal connection with music. And I certainly have on numerous occasions with various Black Sabbath albums, but particularly this one, and due largely to how great the lyrics are and open to interpretation and to making a personal investment in. Yeah, it's a great album. So very cool.
Absolutely.
Good number one.
All right. Well, I would like to thank Darren for coming on the show here and helping with this epic episode here, but we couldn't do it any other way for the week. We had to do it big for the mighty Black Sabbath, right? As you can see, both Darren and I are both very passionate about this. And if you thought we didn't talk enough about these albums here, go listen to our podcast, Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast, where we really dive in deep and get into the songs and the albums and what we think about them. So, all right. Thank you, Darren. And
always a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody out there, for watching and listening. Let me know in the comments what you think. What is your ranking? What do you think about some of these albums? I'm sure some people are going to come back at us. How could you put that? Everybody, hey, that's the great thing about music. That's the great thing about Black Sabbath, where it came in your life. You may like one album much better than we did, or the other way around. That's there is no right or wrong answer. So thank you again. Make sure you hit subscribe and like. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.